everything was so boring. Boring covers, boring topics. And then one day what happened was I got a Facebook DM. Well, hello, welcome back to the Story Learning Podcast. My name is Olly Richards, and I guess I'm your host for the podcast. It has been a while. It has been a little while since the last podcast, but it's also been over 10 years since I first began this podcast. So I think it's fitting that I'm back now for a new season of the podcast, and I'm really excited to have you here. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in. Now, I suppose I should really start by giving a little history of the podcast for those of you who are new to it, because as I said, I started in 2014, 2015. I don't exactly remember, but it was at least 10 years ago. And it started off as basically a way for me to answer people's questions. So I was blogging a lot about languages back in the day, and I would get questions from people asking all kinds of things about language learning. They would send in voice notes and I would reply to them. And it was just a really great, fun way for me to actually take questions that were coming from you, from the audience, and engage with them directly. Because often it's the case that I might write a blog post about a more general topic, but then if you have a question or a struggle about your language learning, there's a lot more depth we can go into, and your own specific situation is unique. And so I just really had such a great time answering people's questions about language learning from my own experience of having learned 8 foreign languages, of teaching languages for many years, more recently for having written and we've published dozens of books. We've sold over 1.5 million copies of these books of short stories. So I'm a different person now. I'm more of, I guess, I've got a slightly wiser head on me. I'm 10 years further on in my own journey than I was when I started the podcast. So recently I've been feeling that I have a lot to offer. I miss getting these questions from you. I miss talking about language learning. So that's it. We are back. Now, if you're watching this on video on YouTube, then you can also sign up on Spotify, where we're going to have an audio feed. And likewise, if you're listening to this on a podcast player somewhere, you can also find us on YouTube. And wherever you get your podcast, you can just search for the Story Learning Podcast and it will pop up. But what's most important for you to know, I suppose, is that I am back answering your language learning questions. You can leave questions for me basically all around the internet. We look everywhere for the questions that you're asking, whether that is a comment on a YouTube video, on this, or on the podcast channel, or on the main Story Learning channel. You can leave questions on Spotify because you've got that interactive stuff going now. So any kind of obvious places, we're going to be scouring for those questions. I'm sure in time we'll give you a more formal way to ask questions as well. So what's been going on in the world of Olly? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we've been writing a lot of books and we've made lots of books now. We've also got more books coming. In fact, we are about to publish 5 new books of short stories. And I'm even going to show you the covers of those short story books a little bit later on the podcast. So that is coming. That's really exciting. We've also got a couple of new book series in the works, but I am not actually sure whether I'm allowed to tell you about them just yet. So we might hold fire on that for another few episodes and come back to it later when we're a bit more sure of what's going on. But you see, recently, I've had in the last year or so, I've had a lot of deja vu with languages, I suppose. My story is I started learning French when I was 19 years old. I moved to Paris. I was quite successful at learning French, and then I learned a whole bunch of languages after that, one after the other. I lived abroad for many years. I went to live in Japan. I lived in the Middle East. And so I learned quite a few languages over a period of 10, 15 years or so. And that's really the backbone of my experience. And but after my 8 languages, I didn't really continue learning anymore. I flirted with German and Thai for a little bit. But I think, I got to a point where I realized with my own language learning that I was no longer getting any satisfaction from what you might call collecting languages. When you've learned 8, adding a 9th or a 10th, for me, didn't really make any difference to my life. And so I entered a phase where I was more interested in actually using the languages that I had learned. And that's been very clear to me recently, because after all the shutdowns, lockdowns around COVID, I've been lucky enough to travel quite a bit recently. And in the last year or so, I've spent time in Japan, I've spent time in Thailand. Most recently, I went to Poland, and I had this strange experience of being a tourist where I had to learn a few Polish words just to kind of get by and try not to be the classic Brit abroad clueless tourist. And that just really started to ignite a bit more of a passion, or reignite the passion for languages for me, I suppose. And that's what brings me back, sitting in this chair in my office recording this podcast for you. So to kick off the new season of the Story Learning podcast, I'm going to answer a question that came in on our YouTube channel about books, asking how it was that I came to write the short story books in the first place. And I suppose the first thing to say is that at StoryLearning, which is my language education company, we teach languages through stories. That's the foundation of the method. If you want to find out more about that, you can read to your heart's content over at storylearning.com. But whether we are teaching language learning courses or writing books of short stories, it is the stories that are at the center of that. And so the reason that I wrote my first books of short stories, again, this was about 10 years ago, around the same time that I started the podcast, it was because when I had learned a lot of my languages, stories and reading were right at the center of all of that. It's always been the case for me that when I've been learning languages, I have used reading and I've read a lot because I have found over and over again that that is the quickest way to develop really solid fundamental abilities in your language. There are lots of ways to get started in a language by memorizing phrases and things like that. Flashcards, kind of methods, or signature methods. But fundamentally, if you think about how you learned your first language, it was a process of having stories read to you as a baby and then reading a lot in the education system. And that is how you developed your abilities in your first language over the course of, what is it, it's like 10, 15, 20 years. That's our process of learning our first language. And so reading is so powerful because you get exposure to the entirety of the language. That's what reading does for you. And you don't have to understand everything to be able to read. When you start reading books as a kid, there's plenty of words that you don't understand. I see this with my daughter all the time. She's glued to books. She'll sit there for hours reading, but then she'll sometimes pop her head up and say, "What does this word mean?" And it's like, well, she didn't need to know that word in order to enjoy the story in the first place. And yet, we often, as language learners, we get very hung up on things that we don't know. So we might try reading a book and there's this word we don't know and there's another word we don't know. So we get all flustered, think we're stupid, and we stop reading. But actually, if you can learn to read properly, this is when everything gets unlocked because you're now able to cover huge amounts of ground. You're able to read stories, read books, read newspapers, all these different things. And you just get so much more exposure to the language, and that is sinking in whether you know it or not. And this is one of the big things about the brain that people don't realize. Even if you are not actively studying, your brain is still learning and soaking things up, provided you're giving it enough exposure to the language. So when I wrote my short story books, it was on the basic belief that reading is the most powerful way to learn a language. But there's a problem because it's very difficult to read a novel in a foreign language that's intended for native speakers. It's very hard. It's the most elegant form of the language. It's supposed to be difficult. So if you've ever tried picking up a novel in the language you're learning, then you will know it's really, really hard. And so there exists this phenomenon called graded readers. And graded readers are short books that you can buy that are made simple. Okay, they're simplified for the benefit of language learners. And I came across these a lot as an English teacher because we'd have these kind of libraries of graded readers, and they were all boring as hell. I mean, it was, for the most part, they would be really poorly produced, boring, cliched cultural stories. Either that or it would be some adaptation of Jane Austen and Charles Dickens or some cheesy Hollywood rom-com or something. And nothing against any of that stuff, but most of us don't want to be reading Shakespeare all the time. We don't want to be reading Dickens all the time. We don't want to be reading, a screenplay of Love Actually for the 17th time. We want new, fresh, interesting stories that relate to us and relate to our lives. And that's what I wanted for my own language learning. And it just didn't exist. When I was walking around bookshops, you get to the graded reader section and it was just boring. Everything was so boring. Boring covers, boring topics. Often they were parallel texts as well. Parallel texts are when you've got the target language on one side and the English translation on the other side. And I don't think that's a great way to learn a language because you're cheating your brain. Your brain should struggle to understand. It should be pushed. And as soon as you have the translation there, yeah, it makes it easy to understand, but it doesn't help you actually get to grips with the language. So anyway, I wanted to write these books that I thought would be useful. And so I wanted them to be accessible and fun, meaning I wanted the stories to be interesting. I wanted the level of the text to be just right for the language level where typically you really want to start reading. So this is A2, B1 level, high kind of elementary, low intermediate type level where reading can really, really benefit you. I wanted to have a variety of stories, so not just like an old romantic novel or a screenplay. I want to have a mix of stories. And I wanted to really try my best to create something that was as useful as possible for learners. So like not too long, not too short, a variety of topics. And so back in the day, what I did was I sat at my parents' kitchen table and I wrote the first book of short stories in Spanish. And then what I did was I went to, I think we had a Facebook group at the time, and I went to our story learning students in the Facebook group and I said, hey, can you guys go and read this story, please, and let me know what you think? So they read it and they gave me feedback. And then I went back to them and I followed up and I asked them, what do you think of the length of the stories? What do you think of the fact that we have 3 chapters, not 4? What do you think of the word list? I was asking them questions about their experience. And, through asking these questions, we got a very strong consensus about what the ideal short story looked like. And once I found that formula, then I set about rewriting the stories, improving the books. And the first Spanish book did really, really well. So I released it in other languages. I translated it into other languages. I made the intermediate version as well as the beginner version. And then one day what happened was I got a Facebook DM. Now this was a message on my Facebook, but it didn't even come through to my main folder. It went through to my junk folder or whatever it was called in Facebook. And this message was from the director of publishing for Teach Yourself. Now, Teach Yourself, you're probably familiar with it if you're a language learner. It's an imprint of John Murray Learning, which in turn is part of the Hachette book group, one of the biggest publishers in the world. And she wanted to talk to me about my readers. And I thought to myself, well, hang on, why do you want to talk to me about my readers? I thought she meant audience. I thought she wanted to talk to me about the readers of my blog. But when we met at the beautiful offices they have in London, she said, no, I mean your readers, your graded readers. And I thought, oh, you want to talk to me about my books? Now that makes sense. Long story short, they loved what I'd been doing with my books, and so we agreed to partner up, and they would now traditionally publish my books for short stories, and the agreement was that we would do it in a bunch more languages. So that's when we redid the books. That's when they started to look a lot more, these kind of beautiful covers that we have, the kind of iconic visuals of the books. And that's when they started to get into the shops, and then gradually we released all these new books after that. So it was a really exciting time for me and for the team at StoryLearning. And we have actually 5 new books, but I'll tell you about those a little bit later. So one question I get all the time is, are these books for beginners or not? And the fact of the matter is that they're not for complete beginners. On the cover, it says short stories in German for beginners. But really, if you are a complete beginner in a language, you're not going to be able to read these books. So when we say beginner, it means much more. It's for early stage learners. And specifically, I wrote these books for the kind of high elementary, low intermediate level, like I said, because that's when you really, really benefit a lot from starting to be able to read. And, often for people ask, why don't you write stories for complete beginners? And my answer is, it's not possible to write an interesting story for complete beginners because you don't know any words. You can't read if you don't know any words. It would be a complete waste of time. And so I thought to myself as part of this process, what is the minimum viable level at which I can write a book of short stories? And you need to know enough words that you can understand an interesting story, and you need to have the stamina to read for more than like 1 page or 2 pages, because I thought to myself, I don't want to do this unless I write interesting stories. And so that's how we ended up landing on that particular level. And in terms of languages, I have actually lost track of how many languages we have now. I think it's something like 18 to 20. Again, I don't know how many books we have. It's something like 25 to 30. If you're watching the video, you can see this on the shelf behind me. But what we do is we work with a very large editorial team. I have a commissioning editor, and then so the commissioning editor oversees the entire series. And then we have development editors who are experts in each particular language. And then we have translators and copy editors who work on the actual, that's when you get down onto the page and sentence and word level inside the individual stories. It's a big team, and we have so many discussions about how to handle the different languages with the different stories, right? Because for some languages like French or Italian, it's difficult. You have some difficult tense choices and verb form choices. So we have endless discussions about how to handle the language for each book, and we can never please anyone. We often get people writing in criticizing it. You made the wrong word choice or verb choice like this, or what. In language learning, you cannot keep everybody happy. So we've used our collective experience and done the best job that we can. But ultimately, one of the things that I like a lot is that I often get emails from people who are from a Welsh or Irish or Icelandic background saying, thank you for making books in our language. And that makes me really happy, because I'm just really pleased to be able to create resources for some underrepresented languages. So in terms of what's next, as I mentioned, as I've been mercilessly teasing you about for the last 15 minutes, we have a bunch of new books in the works. And so what I'm going to do now, for those of you watching the video version, is I'm actually going to show you the prototype of the covers for the next 5 languages. So if you're listening on the podcast and you want to see this, you want to see the covers, then go over to YouTube and search for the Story Learning Podcast, and you'll see this. So first of all, I'm very, very happy to announce that we are releasing short stories in Ukrainian. And I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and it's now a reality. So I'm very, very pleased about that. Short stories in Ukrainian. Short stories in Esperanto. Now, this one you probably didn't see coming, but again, there's a lot of demand in the community of learners learning Esperanto. So that is on the way too. We have short stories in Greek, and I just love the cover of this one in particular, sailing around a Greek island. Greek is another language with not enough resources, so that is awesome. We have short stories in Latin, so this one's for you, Luke. And again, don't you just love the covers of these series? I can't take credit. We have a fantastic cover designer and illustrator. Short stories in Latin, again, a language with not enough resources, but resurging in popularity. And last but not least, this one is one, I tell you, we have put in the hours talking about how to handle the grading of this particular language. And I hope we get it right. Yeah, I'm sure you'll let me know in due course. But we have short stories in Mandarin Chinese. So, isn't this cover fantastic? Anyway, so that's what's coming. Is Ukrainian, Esperanto, Greek, Latin, and Mandarin Chinese. Now, pub date, as it's known, publishing date for those will be probably sometime next year, I think. I'll update you on all of that when the time is right. That's the story of my short stories. And if you're in any doubt at all about why reading is so important, then I would urge you to remember the words of Stephen Krashen, who said, when you get compelling input, you acquire language whether you are interested in improving or not. When you get compelling input, and compelling input is something you enjoy, right? Something that you like. That's why good stories are so important. When you get compelling input, you acquire language, meaning you learn, whether you're interested in improving or not. So wise words from Stephen Krashen. I also have an interview with Stephen Krashen on the podcast, and you can see that on the YouTube channel as well if you scroll back far enough or search. So that's it for today. This is I thought this was an appropriate way to reignite the podcast. I hope you found that interesting, just to hear about how all of this has come together. And if you are a language learner and you'd like to find out more about how you can use stories to achieve your language learning goals, then you can download our free Story Learning Fluency Blueprint. It's a growing resource. We've got quite a lot of stuff in there now, and it will show you how to learn a new language quickly using stories. There's all kinds of things in there, from language lessons through to videos, lots of cool little worksheets and things that you could print out, and other exclusive resources to help you achieve your language learning goals. There'll be a link in the description wherever you are listening to or watching this. But that's it for now. I am so happy to be back. I hope you will enjoy the new refreshed audio-visual story learning podcast, and I'll see you back in the next episode.